Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Let's Talk About. This evening, Phil and I'm going to be chatting about returning home and all the big feelings and struggles that might be connected with that whole situation. This evening it's just Phil and myself, but actually, I think both of us have plenty of experience in returning home and what that means. And so far, we've really looked at all sorts of different topics, such as faith in challenging times, losing a parent to cancer in that specific situation. We've looked at how to deal with anxiety and fear. We've looked at, what else was there? Can't even remember. But this evening, as I said, we're looking at this whole thing of returning home and what does it mean if you maybe unexpectedly have returned home and you're actually realizing that you're struggling and you weren't prepared for that. But also we're going to be looking at the different phases of change and how you can deal with change. And yes, I'm very pleased to have Phil with me, as usual.
Yep.
Phil, you grew up in Papua New Guinea and across other places as well, amongst other places. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about your childhood?
Yeah, well, going back a little ways. So my parents worked with an organisation called MAF, and when I was 3, we moved to the States. When I was 6, we moved out to Australia, and my dad continued some pilots training there because he was a pilot, and we then moved into Papua New Guinea still around when I was 6. I lived in Papua New Guinea from when I was 6 to about 17, minus a few breaks in the middle for when we came back to the UK to see family and friends. So a lot of traveling for those years, and a lot of culture changes and shifts. A couple of them when I didn't really notice when I was really young, but going into Papua New Guinea, growing up in that, and then actually coming to the UK was probably when I really felt the biggest culture shock, just getting through the differences of growing up in Papua New Guinea and then then coming back to the UK, and it's very, very different.
So what was the craziest thing you've experienced? Do you have a really good story that you love to share from Papua New Guinea? That's kind of the place I imagine you get crazy stories from and go on all sorts of adventures.
Yeah, probably. I probably should have prepared at least one. I mean, I grew up. So Papua New Guinea, there's a bit of a variety. You've got the cities, and then you've got the villages, and you've. I was more in the cities, so it was fairly stable environment. You had electricity and running water, and wasn't too much a typical image of a jungle or anything like that. But the sort of difference in culture, I guess. Trying to think of a crazy story. You've put me on the spot here, Lily.
Sorry about that.
Maybe back to the crazy stories, I suppose. Things that I kind of take for granted. So I went to a boarding school, and we would fly to the boarding school. I would stay there for, and actually my dad would fly me and the other kids that would go to this school. We'd stay there for the 10 weeks, and then for holidays we'd flown back, just because of the distance and the roads there weren't very good. So that was kind of a normal experience for me. Not many people could say they were flown to school. So
I think that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that was pretty cool. I mean, it's an amazing place. Look up Papua New Guinea if you've never heard of it. Look at some of the videos and images from there, and it's just an amazing country. They've got 800 languages, I think. It's about that. And just each language is kind of its own little culture because it's from a group of people. And so they've got their own way of tribal dress and different things like that. So I loved it. It's a beautiful country. I'm sure a few stories will come out of this evening.
Yeah, so what are the things you miss most about Papua New Guinea? And I know you've been back in the UK for quite a few years now.
Yeah.
You're not the youngest anymore.
No,
So
yeah, growing older. Yeah.
yeah, so what would you say do you miss the most of that
Um,
life and that culture?
a big thing is the weather. So Papua New Guinea is right on the equator, and
Mm.
you've got beautiful beaches when you're on the coast. I mean, Papua New Guinea is quite big. It's similar size to the UK.
Great.
I was up in the Highlands, which was again very tropical. You just really nice weather to be in. You don't really need any sort of heavy clothing ever. But some of my favourite memories are on the coast and going scuba diving in Papua New Guinea. You've got just really beautiful coral, and yeah, it's an amazing place to visit. But it's even better to live and just experience all of it, as much of it as I could. There's still places I didn't manage to get to see. I'd love to go back, but yeah, and the people, just really friendly people that are out there, and it's a different pace of life as well.
Yeah, but
So there's a few things there.
it doesn't quite sound like Bognor Regis or so on.
Quite different.
Not quite. But if any of you who are watching live right now, you have any questions, please comment, and we'd love to get back to you. So if you have any more specific questions to Phil about his life in Papua New Guinea and growing up and flying to school, not him in a plane, not him himself flying the plane, then do comment, and we'd love to get in touch with you and just answer those questions. I know that you are British, you have a British passport, and I assume you were born in the UK?
I was, yeah, just down the road in Frimley, near Camden.
Right.
So Frimley Park. Yeah, it's where royalty get born as well, so there you go.
There you go. Wow. What an honour. So you were born...
The fame that I'll ever get, I think.
Yeah. So you were born in the UK. You're British, as that's what your passport is, but you grew up abroad and you studied in the UK. So you came back when you were 18, 19?
Yeah, they're about. I was actually quite young for my year, so I was actually back when I was 17, but I did start when I was 18. Yeah. Late birthday.
So yeah, so tell us a little bit more. How was that for you coming to the UK as a British person, but not really British, as in being used to what's going on in the UK and how life works? And maybe tell us a little bit more about what you thought living in the UK would be like, if you can still remember. I don't know if you can. But just that process of expectations and then reality, really.
Yeah, so I had various points of culture shock, kind of as we'd sort of come back from Papua New Guinea as a family at different points. I did manage to at least maintain some connection to the UK with friends, although they weren't strong friendships. There were still people I kind of knew of through my family. I remember it just being really little things that took me off guard when I came back. So things that I thought I'd find easy, like going to the supermarket, I found strangely difficult because I'd just be bombarded with the amount of choice. So in Papua New Guinea, there might be 2 or 3 types of toothpaste, but here you have a whole aisle full of toothpaste. And I remember at one point trying to find toothpaste that I recognized, and it took me ages, and I kind of froze in the supermarket, and it just took me a really long time to find what I was looking for. And I remember just feeling really frustrated, quite angry that I just couldn't get the toothpaste that I wanted. And it just seems such a simple thing, but it was those emotions of I'm not sure where I'm not in a familiar place. And so that kind of emotional unease I found was my shock. It wasn't like overly anxious, but it was just a frustration that I just couldn't do the things that I thought would be really simple or find them as easy. Other things that I experienced, well, I had a really strange accent for a while, and I sort of still do,
you do.
in certain words, and And what I found is that people didn't really know where I was from, and neither did I. So people would say, "Oh, you're Australian," I'd be, "No, I'm actually English," and then I'd have to tell the story, but no one really knows what Papua New Guinea is like because it's not a popular country in terms of tourism and things like that, or they don't know where it is. So the questions would be like, what's that like? And it's kind of like the moment we just had. How do you explain 11 years to someone when, and it's the English thing, they don't really want to know your life story. It's just that's the first thing that came to their mind. And so I found that quite tough. Is the initial conversations were interested and intrigued, but within sort of 2 or 3 weeks of being back, it was like, well, you're in the UK, you've pretty much always been in the UK, and you should just get on with it. And I'd still be missing things from then and have the story to tell, but no one to really engage with. Because even if I told the story, many people just can't picture what I'm talking about, and that gets quite tiring. And so you just end up going with people who say, "How are you?" "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, doing okay." And you kind of try and find a way to manage that.
Yeah, that sounds really tough. And how your family, were they still in Papua New Guinea, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I've got a fairly big family, 3 older brothers, and it did help that we'd come back probably about 7 or 8 months before I came back on my own. So my parents had come back, but they remained in Papua New Guinea when I then left school, secondary school, to come to uni. And so I was sort of on my own, but I was staying with family friends, and they were really helpful. So I did have support around me. I had a church community around me. I had people that I could go out on bike rides with. So the process of settling was okay, in the sense that I had people around me who cared for me, whether or not they understood what I was talking about or came from. They put up with the strangeness, I guess, and persevered, and that's sort of how it came through. I did have people around me, but it took me a little while to process that. And so I came back in sort of March 2005, and then uni didn't start till September. So I had a little bit of time to just kind of figure out life, try and find a job over summer, meet with friends, and develop those relationships a bit. And then uni started, and that was like a whole nother change. So it was a bit, and I did find, and I'm sure some people might find this, I found that actually some of the shock hit around then. Some of that was actually, I think, what we call a honeymoon period. Like, I just enjoyed it. It was exciting. I was making friends and kind of getting on with it. But then it was about 2 years on, actually some things hit me. I was like, oh, I really miss Papua New Guinea now. So the process of returning home can be quite extended. And I think that took me by surprise a little bit as well.
That's interesting that you've just mentioned a certain stage. Can you talk us a little bit through that process and the theory behind the different stages and what you go through, and how that works?
Yeah, so I think it's through processing change anyway. There's a series of things that we go through whenever there's a significant shift, and we might actually be facing it now with the lockdown and what we're going through. So the first stage, what most people call the honeymoon stage, the bit where everything's exciting, everything's new, you're meeting new people, you're kind of telling your story, they're getting to know you, and it's great, it's fun, it's exciting, and that will be the case for many people going back home. But then you start to realize the kind of things that I was talking about, where people don't talk beyond just how are you. They just want to know your day. They don't necessarily want to hear your story. They're tired of hearing about, oh, that reminds me of a time back in Papua New Guinea. They just want to know the memories that you share here. And so that's kind of called flight. You start to go, actually, I really wish I was back there, and I really want to get away from all this stuff that I'm facing, because it's hard and I don't want to be here. And then you start to find that you fit a bit more. You're less battling over all those memories back then. You've actually found some memories here and now, and that helps you start to fit. And then you're fighting to fit, and eventually you get into a position where you actually, yeah, this is, I'm back. I guess I'm here and in the now. And it's not like that's a linear journey. It's not like a straight line that you're going to hit fun, flight, fight, and fit. But actually, you might find that you're in the middle of, okay, I'm here, and then something throws you off, and you go, oh man, I was just back there. And so it can be a little bit of a cyclic circular journey, where one moment's, okay, I'm this is home. And then the next, actually, that's home. Actually, I've got two homes now, and that's kind of where I'm at. Is I'm sure if I went back to Papua New Guinea, I would settle in fairly quick. Although I know a few less people there because they've gone back to their home countries. I was in a community of people that some were Papua New Guinean, but many were from probably about up to 20 other countries. So that's part of it. Is a lot of the change was just missing people. Yeah, so that's the kind of summary.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I remember when I moved back to Germany for quite a few months after having lived in the UK, I started to see people. That sounds a bit creepy. I'm seeing dead people. I saw people that were alive, but I thought I see British people in Germany and the other way around. It's like, hang on a minute. And then trying to sort, where do I know this person from? It's like, no, that's the wrong country. So trying to sort my people according to countries, that was quite a weird stage as well. But yeah, I remember that well, that whole, I wish I would be back and everything was better back in the UK. And I'm really struggling, and I don't fit anymore because I've changed. Yeah, it is an interesting process you're going through. And I think, yeah, you go ahead.
How did you manage those expectations of things before you did you just process them on the spot, or did you find you had to readjust your expectations over time?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really think I've processed it too much. The thing was, so I had been in the UK to do a training course, and I stayed for about 6-7 months, and then I was going back to Germany, but I really felt at home here in Guildford, and I really felt I should be staying. So I was going back to Germany with the purpose of working out if I should move back permanently. So it was slightly different. And I also moved to a new place in Germany to kind of finish my training time. So it was a whole load of not just settling back into Germany, but settling back in Germany into a new community as well, and knowing you're only there for a few months and then you're leaving again, which is a really hard thing to do. And I kind of process it with talking to a lot of people in the UK and kind of, I'm missing you all the time. I actually started to chat a lot with my not then well, he became then, we got married at some point later, but I actually started to chat a lot to this guy I'm now married to. Then yeah, and that I think really helped, talking with people and seeing that, yeah, we all kind of miss each other, but life still continues, and you're making new friends as well, and you're finding your place, and you're finding your new rhythm again. And that really helped to have some sort of structure in Germany as well, and creating fun new memories. And yeah, I think that really helped me, but I didn't really think about it beforehand because I was so focused on finishing things up. And yeah,
I found preparing for, so the first time we ran this returning home seminar, I found preparing for this was actually really cathartic. It helped me figure out the emotions that I'd felt in the past and go, oh, actually, that was really normal. And that was actually something that everyone might experience at some point in their transition. And someone transitioning from going back to their home will experience very different from transitioning to uni for the first time. I think some of those expectations are really interesting, but they need to be managed. So when you're arriving for university, you're arriving for a purpose. You've got study, you've got a set amount of time ahead of you. You know you're going to make some friends who are also in a similar situation from you. And so you've got this direction that you know your life is heading for at least a period of time, whether it's 6 months to 4 years or even longer. And then we think it's going to be easy when we go back home because I know home and home doesn't change. But actually going back home, you then have this open-ended, I need a job. It's not as specific. You might not know what that job is. Your friends and family may well have changed and you haven't realized it, be it that they've changed because of big events. They might have got married or someone's had a child, or sometimes you miss out on things like someone in your family has died, and you forget that that's going to have an impact on family life when you get back. And so you have these life has changed potentially without realizing it back home, but also you've changed and you don't quite realize it over that period of time. You've taken on values and ideas that weren't your family or wherever else you might have based yourself. And so those expectations are really important. And so when I was reading this resource that we have called Returning Home, it really opened my eyes to all these things that I expected to find easy. It's not really surprising that actually I don't find them easy. And so some of it is really important to kind of balance all this conversation. Some of it sounds like it's really hard and really tough, and some of it is, but actually some of it's a lot of fun and exciting, and it's positive, and it's change is just the one thing you can count on in life is that things will change. and that's exciting in some ways. And so finding ways to make those expectations realistic will help with how you settle. And it's finding a balance. There's a phrase that just to put it out there. So if you're overly positive, if everything's going to be easy when you go back, actually you're not going to be ready, because when you face hardship, you'll just want to leave, and you'll be stuck in that flight mode where you want to go back. Whereas if you're really negative, you really don't want to go, and you're so negative that you hate it, well, you won't fit for a very long time. And I have some friends that really got stuck in actually, Papua New Guinea is my home. It's always going to be my home. And they wouldn't connect with people because they were always talking about Papua New Guinea, and they just could not find the good in their circumstance. And so there's a fine line to tread where you're not naive and not so overly positive, you're not expecting any difficulty, but you're not so overly negative that no one wants to hang out with you. And that's a really fine line to work through, and that's kind of what I found really helpful, one of the parts of the seminar.
And I think it is worth saying that probably as you just shared yourself, you worked through things quite a few years later. And I think we might have some people watching who have already returned home, and they think it's all too late now, and I'm in chaos and I don't know how to process this. But actually it's not too late for you to think a little bit about maybe what your expectations were, and then think a little bit more about those things, how you have changed as a person. I've just put something in the chat. It's a bit annoying with that YouTube cuts off things. Anyway, but certainly anyone who's watching on Facebook is going to see the different questions in terms of expectations that might help you to adjust the expectations that make them a little bit more realistic. And I'd really encourage you, if you've already returned home and you find that you're struggling, maybe think through those questions a little bit, and what were your expectations, and were they just unrealistic, or were they overly positive or overly negative, so that you might be able to find a good balance in those, although you've already at home. Bill, is there anything else that you would recommend? Because I remember when we chatted through this before, there was something about the different areas of you as a person and how you might have changed. Is there anything that you could kind of pass on to us, that might help us to think about different areas? Because I think often I think about, well, it's me, and then it's quite hard to pick out the different areas of my life.
Yeah.
Is there anything you could pass on to us?
So there's quite a few. I found it really helpful with the book. So the book I'm talking about, and if you join us on the 3rd of June, we'll be going through some of the resources from this. It's a really helpful resource put together by people with more experience in international settings than myself, and especially when it comes to students returning home. In that resource, they break up a section into 8 parts, which I found helpful, because there were certain things I was aware of, in that I might have changed. Well, I'd gone from going out there when I was 6 to coming back when I was 17. I'd obviously changed physically, emotionally, and I had changed culturally. I was aware of that, just given my accent. And so you've got a couple there. And so some things to think through before you leave is, how have you changed physically? So I know some students who are really worried that when they go back, they'd put on weight. But there were other people I know who were going back, and they were worried because they were skinny, and they were worried about the comments like, oh, you haven't eaten well. And in some cultures that's not a good sign. So they changed physically, and they were worried about the repercussions of that, and the kind of questions that they might face. Socially, they'd changed their ways that they interact with people, potentially use of language, or even just the kinds of people they like to hang out with. And that's a really important one, because what you might find is you go back home and that really good friend you had, they've changed as well. And some of you don't get on as well. And so you end up with a difficulty there. And you suddenly find that actually you might get on with someone you didn't before. So there might be a positive in that as well. Academically, obviously, you're here to study. You've become, hopefully, better read, better studied, and you will know more, and that may actually put a little bit of friction with those you might work with, especially if you're on a placement from a workplace. Your colleagues may well wrestle with the fact that you now know more than them, and that is something that needs to be worked through. Emotionally, you might, and this could go either way, you might find that it's been really hard and you're a bit more emotionally fragile, or you might have found that the whole experience has really strengthened you emotionally, and how you react to things will depend on your emotional awareness and your well-being. Politically, you might find that actually looking back at the politics back home, your views on them have changed, and where you're at now may well change your views as well. Again, how the UK has dealt with lockdown, you may be pro, you may be against, and you might be looking at home and going, actually, they dealt with it better or worse. And so your politics and views of that might change, and that again might have friction on around you with people around you. And then 3 others: financially, culturally, and then spiritually. And these are actually quite big ones, because money has a lot of impact relationally. Culturally, you're sometimes unaware of the values that the British culture is you've picked up. It might be phrases, it might just be how you interact. You might suddenly have the British "how are you," where you don't actually really want to know the story. You just say "how are you," because that's how you say hello. And spiritually, you might have changed your beliefs while you're here, and that is a big one as well, and that can cause some friction with family, and you might have to work that through with them. So there's 8 there. Obviously, rewind this if it's helpful, but the book goes through it, and it helps you answer questions about each of those 8 areas, and they're really, really helpful. And it's something you can visit more than once, because we are all growing people and changing people, and those 8 areas will change over time throughout your life. And so this helps us adapt to any change.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. I'm just looking at the time, and we're slowly coming towards the end of the half an hour. That might be a little bit longer than a half an hour.
Yeah.
But as we're coming to an end, we've talked a little bit about closure and the importance of saying goodbye. We are aware that we're talking to international students that might have left very suddenly, and they just needed to get on a plane before they could sort out things, before they could say their goodbyes, before they had graduation even. So is there something that you could pass on as an advice, kind of to say your goodbyes kind of while you've already left, after you've already left? Is there anything that students could do that helps them to kind of find closure a little bit more?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it's never too late to start thinking about closure, and it may be that you're still in the point. Maybe you didn't quite have the honeymoon period. It was just sudden shock, and you're back into lockdown or even quarantine, and that's suddenly it's tough, and you haven't really had a way to really close off this period. And I think many of us might be in that position still. This was all really sudden, and we're trying to work out how to move on, I guess. And it's really important to find that. And so there's certain areas I'd recommend thinking about, especially if you've suddenly found yourself at home in your home country months earlier than expected. So thinking about the relationships, who do you need to thank? Who has helped you in settling in the UK, and who are those people that you'd really like to say thank you to? Find a way to email them, and maybe even say goodbye in that way. And yeah, that's the difficulty. If you've left and you don't have the technology, then maybe you can find a friend who in the UK who can connect you to them. But also just with relationships, just be aware that over time, if distance will impact your relationship with people. So again, it's managing your expectations as to how realistic it is to keep all those connections you had when you were in close proximity on uni. How likely is it that you're going to keep all those relationships really close knit all your way? And that's hard, and that's part of the process of closure. So who do you need to thank? Who do you need to say goodbye to? And how are you going to keep in touch with those that you really, really want to keep in touch with? Then there's really practical stuff like loose ends. Have you left some stuff in the UK? How can you start to get it back to you, or do you actually need it? Is it worth asking the person or place that's storing it to give it to charity? Those are things that are really practical. Have you left any bills or things for housemates that you need to pay? It's really worth thinking through what can you just let go without burdening other people, and what do you have to close off financially. The university is really good at this. So if you're in the university now and are leaving soon, they have a long list of stuff, a tick list of things, how to leave well. So do make sure you use that resource. And then just if you have time, just think about and talk about with your tutor, if you can, what happens next career-wise, and do take time if you're able to. If you're not able to, well, again, I said there's no time is too late. Start planning some time in to really think, if you've gone straight into a job, is this the job that you want? How long do you have in that job if it's not? And what can you do to make the next step? Memories, how are you keeping track of them? Have you just got everything on your camera roll and just going to let it sit there? There's some great web apps now where you can literally upload your photos and they'll print them off, and you can put memories, put them on the wall, and organize them so that I'm really bad at this. We went to Iceland last year and we still haven't printed out our photos from last year, and just find some way to do that. Make the memories, have them around, and just plan in some time to do that. And some other things, just very briefly, the packing and traveling has probably already happened. If it hasn't and you are looking to do that, start early. you've probably got a lot of stuff over your period of time here. Try and make sure that you don't take everything with you, because freight is expensive. Find ways to sell stuff, give stuff away, and keep the things that are important and are going to last. And yeah, I think those two things are really careful. Those few things are helpful. They were for me when I was looking through it. But I think also just preparing yourself to have both managing your expectations, but being grateful for what you have had here is a really good starting point in all this that's ahead of you. Reflect on what you're thankful for. It is a really helpful thing to do.
And I think when I thought about that, what probably helps is to admit that your heart is always going to be in two places as well, and there's always a little bit of you that is still going to be in that other place, and a little bit of you that is more British than you thought. And it's just the way life works when we travel and we live in other countries, and take a little bit from the culture with us and make that our own as well. Yep. So I think, yeah, that's always part of that as well. We've come to an end here, but we are offering a returning home seminar where we take a little bit more time to look at the questions we've looked at, and some others we haven't even touched on yet, on the 3rd of June at 7:30 on Zoom. The details are on the Friends International app, and if they're not there right now, they're gonna go on the app shortly. Details should come up on Facebook soon as well, once we're a little bit closer to the time. But we'd really encourage you, if you're returning home, if you've returned home already in the last few weeks or months, or if you're about to return home in the next few weeks and months, then do join us for that seminar. It's free, and we really recommend you, because we really recommend it to you, because it is really a thing. Reverse culture shock is a struggle that is real. It's not just the culture shock, but it's reverse culture shock as well. And we want for you to have the easiest ride in getting used to this new but familiar place as easy as possible and as quickly as possible as well. So we'd really recommend for you to join us on the 3rd of June at 7:30 on Zoom. And I think that's all. Next week, do you want to tell us a little bit more about next week, Phil?
So
if you can remember the details.
I'm trying to remember the details about next week. So on Monday, we're trying to, and we will confirm this, hopefully have a similar topic, but with a student who has returned.
That's not next week.
That's not next week, sorry. Have I got
next week? Is Mark.
Mark. Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, no, this is live. I've got my date. So I can't remember the details. You sent it through. So I've got Mark, and it's very much about being grateful in difficult circumstances. And yes, so yeah, that's fine. So yeah, it's going to be a nice chat with Mark. It's going to be me and him, and I believe Hugh.
Someone else. Yeah,
he's going to be on the chat. And as we've ended this talk about being grateful, it's going to be a little bit of a theme in the next one, and he's got a really interesting story of his own life, and the difficulties that he's faced, and how to be grateful in that is going to be interesting, and how to apply it to now.
Definitely, yes. And after that, we're going to be back. Hopefully with some student stories, how they found returning home, going through that process and sharing a little bit of their stories with us as well. So that is hopefully about to come in 2 weeks. And we'd love for you to get in touch with us. If you watched it live or if you watch it later and you have any questions, the contact details are in the ticker just below. Find us on Instagram or Facebook. If you're watching this on Facebook, you've already found us, or you can email us as well. But we'd love to hear from you, hear your experience, your questions. As Friends International, we are here to support international students in any way we can, connect them with other internationals, connect them with local people, and support them as much as we can. So please do get in touch, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. But that's all for now. We hope you have a lovely evening. We hopefully gonna have a lovely evening as well. We're gonna see you next week. Well, Phil is gonna see you next week. I'm gonna have a day off next week. So thank you so much, guys, and hopefully see you soon. Bye.
Bye.